So it seems like the affordable flagship territory is probably the hottest it's ever been in 2016. I mean, you got phones like the OnePlus 3, the Honor 8, the Alcatel Idol 4 and 4S, and hell, even Apple even got into the game with the iPhone SE. One of the most recent competitors to the game though is one called Axon, and you've probably never heard of them. But if you've ever walked into a phone store, you've probably seen a cheap ZTE phone sitting around. Well, ZTE owns Axon, and last year they entered the cheap flagship party with the Axon Pro. It was generally received as a pretty decent phone, but it didn't really turn any heads or get any considerable amount of attention. This year they seriously stepped up their game with the release of the Axon 7. I mean, this is a phone that's been one of my favorites to get my grubby paws on in a long time. I'm actually going to start things off a little bit differently here just because of how impressed I was with the unboxing experience. Unboxings are something that's usually just kind of a one and done type thing, and I don't think you realize how big of an impact it unconsciously plays on your perception of a product. I mean, imagine if during the R&D process, Apple decided to be like, we've got this incredibly revolutionary, world-changing, design-forward iPhone, and we'd like to introduce to you our latest revolution, the iBox. See, it's not just any box. It's a used box that Tim got in the mail last week from Amazon while he was ordering a headphone adapter for his iPhone 7. It even still has the Amazon Prime tape on it from the last thing he ordered. Truly revolutionary. Okay, so maybe I'm being a little dramatic, but you get the idea. You get that phone in a piece of crap cardboard box and you'd immediately have a negative bias towards it before you even pick it up. I mean, it's unconscious, but it's a real thing. With the Axon 7, you get the box, and it's this big hunk of soft touch cardboard with a strip down the center that identifies the color of the phone you have. You open it up and the phone is nicely presented. You remove the phone and you find the wall plug, the USB-C cable, typical stuff, but you get hi-fi headphones, a clear case, and you know that paperwork that nobody ever reads? Well, inside that package is even an included screen protector. So this is a call to every freaking manufacturer. If ZTE can include all of this with a phone in a high quality box for $399, what's your excuse? I mean, right off the bat, you're like, well, this is pretty nice. If anyone from ZTE is listening, pat yourself on the back, because that's a job well done. Really good marketing there. Now, if only you could actually buy the phone, because as of right now, they're not shipping until the middle of October. But anyway, let me get off my soapbox and we'll continue with the actual review. Alright, I got a lot of ground to cover here, so I want to get through this part quick and then just get straight to the meat and potatoes of this review. Buckle up and let's talk specs real quick. So, the Axon 7 comes in two colors. You get Ion Gold or Quartz Gray. It's got a 5.5-inch 1440p AMOLED screen with Gorilla Glass 4. You get 64 gigs of internal memory with the option for 2 SIMs, or you can use one of the SIM slots for a micro SD card. That's a big plus for me. I don't know why that's not standard for every phone. Seems like a pretty simple implementation to me. It's got a 20 megapixel Samsung ISOCELL rear camera with optical and electronic stabilization. It's got some pretty sweet capabilities. Just hang around for the camera section, we'll get to that. It also has an 8 megapixel selfie cam, and we'll touch on that later too. The rear camera even has a sapphire crystal covering. The only thing the average person should really care about that for is because it'll make it harder to scratch. It's packing a Snapdragon 820 with 4GB of RAM. There's talk about a 6GB of RAM version, but it's not currently out and I honestly don't think it needs it. It's got a 3250 mAh battery that you can't replace, but it comes with Quick Charge 3.0 with USB-C. It's pretty good, so I'll take it. And if you notice, the fingerprint sensor is on the back. And last but not least, my absolute favorite part of this phone, I'm just going to tell you right now, is the dual front-facing speakers. Trust me, you'll hear more about these shortly. They're amazing. As far as spec dumps go and as far as things that I think truly matter in a phone, this pretty much has it all. Some people would argue that water resistance is necessary, and maybe that matters to you, but I personally don't mind not having it. So a quick tour of the phone shows the camera on the back complete with a dual tone flash and the fingerprint scanner. The camera does protrude. I don't like that, and I don't really have an explanation why manufacturers do it. The left side has the SIM/micro SD card tray. The right has a power button and volume rocker. Quick note on the buttons. 1, I absolutely hate the placement of the power button. I think it should go above the volume rocker every single time. It's really annoying to me. Maybe it's just my muscle memory, I don't know, but I can't tell you how many times I've tried to adjust the volume only to look like a fool turning my screen on and off like 5 times. Super annoying. And 2, the buttons themselves feel kind of mushy and weird. Remember in my first impressions video where I said, first off, it feels really, really nice, but there's something about it. It's almost like it's trying too hard to feel premium, and it's not that it doesn't. I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it. Well, I figured out what that was. The angle of the curves on the back coupled with the weird mushy buttons just kind of detract from the premium feel of the phone. It's not like it's a make or break thing, but it's one of those small attention to detail type issues that really bug me from time to time. Moving to the top, you got a headphone jack that, despite what Apple thinks, is still something people want. On the bottom is the USB-C port. On the front is that 5.5-inch screen with the selfie cam, and these capacitive home buttons that are so obnoxious. They're way too close. The fact that they're there is fine, I like them there. But why would you put them that close? I still haven't been able to get used to it in like a month. And of course, them speakers. Quick side note on that actually, thanks to a commenter on my first impressions video, I also learned that the speakers are plastic on the front. And I didn't think to check, so I assumed they were metal, but that explains the scratch that I complained about in my first impressions video. I do want to give a quick disclaimer on the speakers though. I am not and have never claimed to be an audiophile. Because of that, I know the basics of sound quality, but I really can't get into the nitty gritty. If you're someone who wants to take an in-depth look at the behind the scenes and the overall sound system and the DAC in this phone, check out Juan Carlos Bagnell at Pocket Now. I'll give you the basics of what the average consumer needs to know about this sound system, but I'd be doing both you and ZTE a disservice if I didn't at least somehow help you understand what this thing can really do on the sound front, because it's so much more capable than most phones on the market. Since we're on the topic of speakers, let's just go straight into them. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Axon 7 has some of the loudest speakers on any smartphone on the market currently, and some of the best sounding. It's really rare for me to have them on the highest volume setting because there's rarely a need for it. Sound quality is preserved even at the highest volume, and there's a noticeable amount of richness to it. Like drum hits are clearly identifiable, and just all of the sounds are so much more defined. It's hard to put to words, especially when you're not an audiophile like me. The phone itself has actually replaced my need for a Bluetooth speaker most of the time. It's not because it gets as loud as them or anything, it's just that it gets loud enough to where it's not really worth the extra effort. And even beyond the sound output, there's just a level of crispness in the audio that I have yet to find anywhere else. A quick example would be, I like to listen to the Clark Howard Show a lot. It's a radio show that revolves around finance if you're not familiar. And through these speakers, there's a certain edge to his voice that I don't notice on many other sound systems. The headphone jack also outputs noticeably better sound quality than most anything else I've used, and it puts out some crazy volume. Please don't put these at the highest volume in your ears, you're gonna blow your eardrums out. Like I said, I'm not an audiophile, so I can't sit here and tell you about the different advantages of the hi-fi DAC in this phone. But I can tell you that 1, the audio quality is much richer than most, 2, I noticed the difference, and 3, you will hear the difference. Even if you're not an audio junkie, it's noticeable. A quick note on the headphones that come with the phone. They feel well built and they're pretty, but I wouldn't really go so far as to call them premium. The sound itself is really crisp, but it's kind of botched by the poor design. I've talked to 2 other people who have Axon 7s and we all agree, the headphones just don't fit very well. They feel kind of small and they fall out pretty easily. It's kind of a major missed shot on a phone that's supposed to focus on audio. Let's move to the camera. The camera on the Axon 7 is fine. I'll just get this out of the way right now. You're not buying this phone for the camera, and if you planned on it, you might need to weigh the costs and benefits. The camera on the back is a 20 megapixel sensor from Samsung. It's got optical and electronic stabilization like I said earlier. It also has phase detection autofocus and an f1.8 aperture. This is all marketing speak, and it's not to say it's not true, but don't get too wrapped up in all of it. I will say though, this is easily one of the most capable cameras on the market, and not just in the cheap flagship area, but capable is the key word. It needs work. The app has about every possible setting you can think of and a ton of modes you're never going to use, but seriously, going through all the settings would require a video itself, so I'm just going to talk about what the majority of people are going to use, auto mode. I do have to say, the camera takes some of the nicest daytime shots I've seen in a good while. Pictures are really sharp thanks to the resolution, colors are extra saturated and punchy on the AMOLED screen, which looks really good to your eye. But things are not all good with the camera. It needs some serious work. The focusing is kind of slow. We're not even talking compared to like the flagships like the Galaxy S7. I'm talking compared to like other phones at the price even. And the camera app is just kind of clunky and slow. I will say though, I really like that it auto detects your situation and changes modes based off of that, and it lets you know what mode it changed to, so you can kind of keep an eye on which mode you might need for different scenarios. Also, do not try to take a picture of anything moving too quickly, because you're almost guaranteed to get a blurry subject, just every single time. And don't expect too much out of the camera in low light, because it will be grainy, and it's probably going to have some blur from hand movement, and the details are going to look kind of soft. It's really kind of sad how poorly it is in low light, because it's actually really good in good lighting. So the moral of the story, the camera needs work. Now video on the other hand is a completely different story. You got a bunch of different resolution options, and stabilization's above average and keeping things steady. There's no weird jelly effect that I always talk about. And the audio quality recorded in videos is excellent, but it better be on a phone that's bragging about audio. Does a pretty good job focusing and staying on target. It's got nice color reproduction too, a little saturated like the pictures are. It may seem like I say that for a lot of cameras, but that's just because it's common practice. The average person would much rather see a colorful photo and video over a dull one, so you're much more likely to see a camera that takes overly saturated pictures. It also does a really nice job transitioning from different exposures and not blowing out the shot. I was really impressed with the slow-mo too. You can get 240 FPS at 720p or 300 FPS at 480p. You don't get sound out of the slow-mo, which is kind of a bummer, but it's really nice footage either way. If you watch my OnePlus 3 review, you'll see I talked about the camera not being able to keep focus on an AR-15 while it shoots, but the Axon 7 is able to do that really well actually. This is actually a really tough shot for a camera to pull off, because not only do you have the detail on the gun, but you got the smoke discharge from the barrel and the dirt flying and the backstop in the distance and the shell being ejected. Nice job there, ZTE. The front camera is just okay. The camera app takes fine pictures, but like I mentioned in the OnePlus 3 review, it's really popular to take those pictures in Snapchat and save them, and they look noticeably soft when coming from there. I'm not sure why, because it's 8 megapixels like most phones anymore, but I just thought you should know. Okay, let's talk performance for a minute. I think we've reached a point where just about any phone above $300 to $400 are all going to perform about the same, about as well as you can expect a phone to. As much as we want a phone or really any device to perform 100% of the time, the reality is that technology just doesn't allow it. I mean, we all have different uses. The Axon 7 performs smoothly and chugs along anything I've been able to throw at it. It's actually been one of the most consistent phones for me on performance next to the OnePlus 3. I rarely find myself going into the recent apps and clearing them. Outdoor visibility is fine. Most phones are really going to be kind of poor outdoors in direct sunlight, and this one's nothing different. You don't get anything crazy like dash charging from OnePlus, but you get Qualcomm's Quick Charge 3.0, which I think is at least quick enough to negate the need for a removable battery. I've been playing Marvel Contest of Champions a little bit lately, which has always been smooth, and let me tell you, it is fan-freaking-tastic in combination with the speakers. Honestly, any game you play in landscape mode is going to be made that much better because of the speakers. They really are that good. I'm about to say something that I don't think I've ever personally said for any smartphone, but the battery life is excellent. So here's the thing, for whatever reason, ZTE doesn't give you a way to see your screen on time in the software. I don't know why. But I've done my own tracking, and I regularly get 5 to 6 hours of screen on time on a normal day, and over 6 hours on a good day. With my heavy use, that's awesome. And finally, let's talk about what's probably one of the most important pieces to any device to me, and that's the user experience. So the Axon 7 has Android Marshmallow out of the box with ZTE's skin called Mi Favor UI. As a whole, I actually really like the skin. I'm surprised because I consider myself a Nexus guy. It's sort of a mix between Android Marshmallow and Nougat, but in a good way. Okay, so here's the thing with this part. I actually had started recording and editing audio for this particular section, complaining about some of the weird inconsistencies, and then there was actually an update for the Axon 7 that fixed some common problems, like ZTE actually listened. One of my biggest complaints, and it was minor to most people but kind of big to me, was when you do what's called redrawing your launcher, and that's literally just hitting your home button going back to your main screen. So essentially what ZTE had initially is they had an animation that looked like you were using an iPhone. You kind of flew in from space, but it didn't really fit because everything else came in from the top or the bottom or the left or the right. Now I do wish ZTE could make up their mind. If you're going to transition up, transition out of the app down, not left, right, up, down, whatever. We're not using cheat codes here. But they actually listened and they addressed a real concern. They didn't get rid of the lock screen bell, but apparently that's in the works. But that actually gives me a lot of faith going forward. There's still no double tap to open the camera, or at least any sort of quick gesture. You have to turn your phone on, and the quickest way you could get it would be to use a shortcut on your lock screen. I mean, some form of quick launch is standard by this point. Get on the ball, ZTE, come on. The update did claim camera performance enhancements. To be honest, I don't really see anything. Some people were saying that the low light performance was a little bit better. If it is, it must be marginal because I don't see it and I still think it's subpar. There's also a couple sections that need an aesthetic upgrade like I mentioned in my first impressions video. Again, these are super minor things, but I'm talking about making the user experience feel whole. I think ZTE is on the right track here, but they need to do a little more work. The fingerprint scanner is a tad bit slower than others that I've used, I'll say that, but the average person's probably not going to notice that. I actually prefer fingerprint scanners on the back because I can just pull the phone right out of my pocket and boom, it's unlocked, no questions asked. Signal reception across the board is actually noticeably weaker than other phones, and I'm not the first to say this. I've noticed the Bluetooth range is a good 5 to 10 feet shorter than usual, and cell reception is definitely below average. Not terrible, but for example, in my basement with most phones, I'll have about 2 bars of LTE running off of Cricket, and this one I only get 1. Wi-Fi's been fine, but Bluetooth and LTE were noticeably kind of lackluster. Speaking of cell reception, let's talk on the calls real quick. The caller said I sounded fine, just like any phone anymore, but they actually sounded really good, for a phone call, and the speaker was plenty loud. Another thing that I think was a really big missed opportunity is the lack of what's called a dedicated DSP. DSP stands for Digital Signal Processor, and it's a chip that's most known for allowing voice commands to be used regardless of whether you're using the phone or whether the screen's on or off. Now yes, you can use voice commands while the phone is on or while it's charging, but being able to just have your phone sit there and say the phrase and just start playing music would be a really nice addition to some great speakers that this phone has. Another minor thing I've noticed that is becoming a huge pain in the ass is the flashlight that just likes to randomly turn on in my pocket. I have no explanation as for why it does this, but it's happened more than a few times and it's really annoying. Alright, and lastly, but certainly not least, I absolutely hate that stupid notification bell they did on the lock screen. If you don't know what this is, I'm gonna learn ya. On your lock screen, you can't see your notifications until you tap the bell on the top left-hand side every single time. There's no way to turn this off, and it provides absolutely zero benefit except for maybe seeing your lock screen wallpaper, especially considering that the lock screen is supposed to provide a quick glance at what you have to see if you need to even bother unlocking your phone. It just doesn't make any sense, and I don't mean to rant on it, but this is something that is a major hindrance to the user experience on a phone, so it should at the least be made optional. Alright, now that I've finished ranting, let's wrap up here. The Axon 7 has been one of the most fun devices for me to review. You can tell ZTE put a lot of thought into this phone, everything from the packaging and the freebies that come into it, to the additions on their skin that are actually useful. It's got phenomenal speakers and headphone output, excellent battery life and performance, and little bonuses like micro SD card expansion, and even a really good 2-year warranty. Make sure you check that part out if you're looking at this phone. All combined with a surprisingly good user experience. It's just flawed with quirks like spotty antennas or a clunky camera that does poorly in low light, and interface inconsistencies and quirky gestures, and a huge question mark for future updates. I'm optimistic because they've actually been transparent and they're trying to work with people to fix real problems, but they're still a really fresh company. I like to make the comparison between Axon and OnePlus. They're both Chinese phones and both are pretty new. OnePlus refined the OnePlus One a lot with the OnePlus 2. Axon improved on the Axon Pro a lot with the Axon 7. OnePlus made a stellar phone with the OnePlus 3. You see where I'm getting at? The Axon 7 as it stands is a great phone, and it might actually end up being my personal phone. I think I can live with the quirks. Personally, I think it's completely worth your money if you can live with the annoyances that I've talked about here. and if they can stay transparent about software updates. If they can build off of this foundation like OnePlus did with the OnePlus 2 for whatever phone they make next year, sometime in 2017 we are going to see one kick-ass Axon phone.